The train station was small, made of old wooden beams, and stood quietly at the edge of town. Dusty winds carried through the wide plains, and the sound of the train whistle echoed across the land. People gathered on the platform, greeting family members, unloading goods, and moving with cheerful faces. But in the middle of all that noise and laughter, one woman stood apart. She was dressed in a simple white dress, stitched carefully by her own hands. It was not grand, not like the gowns of wealthy women in the city, but every thread carried her hope and her dream. She was supposed to be a bride that day. Her name was Ayanna, and she had traveled far, her heart full of joy and expectation. The man she loved had promised to meet her here. He had written to her, telling her to wait at this station, that they would start a new life together. She had believed him. She had believed every word. She held her small bag close, her eyes fixed on the train as it slowed and came to a halt. Smoke filled the air and people rushed around her. Her heart beat fast, her hands trembled, and she waited for the moment when she would see him stepping down. The crowd thinned. Families reunited. A mother hugged her son. A husband kissed his wife. Children laughed as they ran to greet their father. But no one came for her. Ayanna waited, searching every face. She looked left, then right. She stood on her toes, stretching her neck to see over shoulders. But there was no sign of him. The whistle blew again, long and sharp, as the train began to move away. The wheels clattered against the tracks, carrying passengers to places unknown. Her hope began to sink with every sound of the train leaving. Minutes passed. She stood frozen, her eyes wide, her lips trembling. The platform grew empty. Only a few strangers remained, some glancing at her with pity, others whispering as they walked by. She felt their eyes. She felt their judgment. They saw her dress, they saw her waiting alone, and they understood. She had been left. She had been abandoned. Her heart tightened in her chest. She tried to hold back the tears, but they came anyway. Her vision blurred as she wiped her face with her sleeve, but more tears kept falling. She had dreamed of this day, dreamed of happiness, of love, of building a home. Now those dreams were broken, scattered like leaves in the wind. She wanted to run away, to hide from the stares, but her legs would not move. Ayanna felt shame, though she had done nothing wrong. She felt pain, as if her heart itself had cracked open. Her thoughts turned dark. How could she return to her people like this? How could she face them? They would ask. They would wonder, and she would have no answer but silence. She had trusted him. She had believed in his promises, and now she was left alone in a strange place. The sky was bright, but her world had grown dim. The sound of laughter from across the platform stung her ears. She envied the families, the joy in their eyes, the comfort of belonging. She had no one. She stood by herself, a bride with no groom, and the cruel weight of it pressed down on her shoulders. She thought of leaving the station, of walking into the vast plains beyond. But where would she go? She had little money, only the clothes she wore and the bag she carried. The world seemed too big, too empty, too unkind. She lowered her head, her tears falling onto the wooden boards beneath her feet. For a moment she felt as if her life had ended before it even had the chance to begin. The wind picked up, carrying dust across the platform. She closed her eyes against it, and in that silence she heard a small voice, soft, gentle, uncertain. "Lady, why are you crying?" She opened her eyes and turned. There, standing a few steps away, was a little girl. She could not have been older than 7. Her hair was messy, her dress worn and patched, and in her arms she held a small doll with one button eye missing. The child's face was pale, her eyes large and filled with concern. Ayanna blinked, trying to wipe away her tears quickly, not wanting the child to see her pain. "It is nothing," she whispered. "Go back to your family." But the girl did not move. She held the doll closer and shook her head. "You're sad. My papa says we should never leave someone alone when they're sad." Ayanna's throat tightened. She did not know what to say. No stranger had ever spoken to her with such simple kindness. The child stepped closer, her small shoes tapping lightly against the wood. Then, in a voice almost too soft to hear, she said, "My papa needs you." The word startled Ayanna. She frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" The girl looked down at her doll, then back up at Ayanna. "My papa is sick. He is alone. He works very hard, but he is tired all the time. He prays every night that someone will help us. When I saw you, I knew. You're the one he's waiting for." Ayanna stared at the child. She felt her heart stir in a way she could not explain. She had just lost everything, her love, her dream, her reason for being here. And yet in the middle of her sorrow, this little girl had appeared, speaking words that touched something deep inside her. The bride who had been left behind now found herself standing before a child who seemed to believe in her. She had no answers, no understanding of why this was happening, but in that moment she felt a small flicker of something she thought was gone. Hope. The train had carried away her past, but maybe, just maybe, this little girl was the beginning of something new. The little girl's words stayed in Ayanna's ears like a soft echo. She stood on the empty platform, her heart still heavy with grief but her eyes now fixed on the child in front of her. The girl's voice had been clear, almost too certain for someone so young. "My papa needs you." Ayanna wanted to dismiss it as childish imagination, but something about the girl's tone felt deeper, more honest, more real than anything she had heard that day. The girl tugged at her sleeve, her small hand gripping the thin fabric of Ayanna's dress. "Please don't go," she said in a pleading voice. Her eyes were round and shining, full of innocence, but also carrying a weight that seemed far too heavy for such a young soul. Ayanna bent down slowly, her long hair falling around her face as she tried to meet the child's gaze. "Little one, you must be mistaken. I am not the person your papa is waiting for. I came here for someone else." Her voice trembled as she spoke, the sting of her own words reminding her of the man who had left her behind. The child shook her head firmly, clutching her doll closer to her chest. "No, I know. I prayed too. I asked God to send someone. And when I saw you crying, I knew you were the answer. Papa always says that sometimes blessings come when we least expect them." Ayanna's chest tightened. She wanted to argue, to explain that she was broken, that she was no blessing to anyone. But the sincerity in the girl's eyes left her silent. She stood again, unsure of what to do, her thoughts tangled. She looked around, expecting to see a mother or family member coming to fetch the child, but no one came. The platform was nearly empty now, the last echoes of the departing train fading into the distance. "Where is your mother?" Ayanna asked gently. The little girl's expression darkened and her shoulders drooped. "Mama is with the angels," she whispered. "Papa says she watches over us from heaven." The words pierced Ayanna's heart. She looked at the child with new eyes, seeing not just innocence but also loss that matched her own. Here was a little one who knew what it meant to be abandoned, not by choice but by fate. Ayanna felt a sudden bond, thin but undeniable, as if pain itself had tied them together. The girl tugged her hand again. "Please come. Papa is waiting." Ayanna hesitated. Her mind screamed that it was foolish to follow a stranger, that she needed to think of herself, that she had no strength left to give anyone else. But her heart whispered something different. It whispered that maybe this meeting was not by accident. Maybe the tears that had fallen on the wooden planks of the station had been noticed by someone greater than her, and this little girl was sent as a sign. Before she could change her mind, Ayanna nodded. "All right, take me to your papa." The child's face lit up with relief, and without hesitation she grasped Ayanna's hand. Her small fingers were warm, fragile, yet full of trust. Together they stepped off the platform and onto the dirt road that stretched out of town. The road was long and dusty, lined with dry grass swaying in the wind. The sun had begun to set, painting the sky with streaks of gold and orange. Ayanna walked quietly, her white dress brushing against the earth, her bag still clutched in her other hand. The child skipped beside her, humming softly to herself, as if this moment were the most natural thing in the world. As they walked, Ayanna asked, "What is your name, little one?" The girl smiled shyly. "Nita," she replied. "It means bear in Mama's language. Papa says I must be strong like a bear." "A good name," Ayanna said softly. "And your papa? What is he like?" Nita thought for a moment, her face serious. "He is strong. He works very hard, but since Mama went to heaven, he has been tired. Sometimes I see him cough and hold his chest. He thinks I don't notice, but I do. He tries to smile for me, but his eyes are sad. I don't want him to be alone. That's why I prayed for someone like you." Her words made Ayanna's throat ache. She remembered her own father, who had once carried her on his shoulders and told her stories by the fire. She remembered her mother, who had taught her to sew the very dress she now wore. They were gone too, taken by illness, leaving her to walk life's road with only her own courage. Now here was a little girl who spoke with the same loneliness, the same longing for comfort that Ayanna knew all too well. The walk continued, the town fading behind them. They passed fields left untended, fences broken by time, and cattle wandering near dry patches of land. The world seemed tired, yet in the middle of it, Nita's small voice carried hope. She talked about the doll she carried, about how Papa had sewn its dress when Mama was gone. She spoke of the nights when Papa told her stories of stars and promised her that tomorrow would always come, no matter how dark the night felt. Ayanna listened, her heart slowly softening. The sorrow of the station still clung to her, but Nita's words washed over her like a gentle river. She felt herself breathing easier, the heaviness in her chest loosening just a little. At last they reached a small clearing where a modest wooden cabin stood. Its roof was patched, its walls weathered, but smoke rose faintly from its chimney, a sign of life within. Chickens clucked nearby, and a tired horse stood tethered to a post. The place was humble, but it carried a sense of home that Ayanna had not felt in a long time. Nita ran ahead, her little feet kicking up dust. "Papa, Papa!" she called out, her voice filled with excitement. She turned back to Ayanna and waved for her to follow quickly. The door creaked open and a man stepped into the fading light. He was tall, though his shoulders were stooped from years of labor. His hair was dark with streaks of gray, his face rugged and lined, and his eyes carried the weight of sorrow and weariness. He coughed into his hand before wiping his mouth, then straightened when he saw his daughter running to him. He bent down, scooping her up into his arms with effort, but his smile for her was tender. "Nita, my little bear," he said in a hoarse voice. Then his eyes shifted to Ayanna, standing uncertainly by the fence, her white dress glowing faintly in the last rays of the sun, his brows furrowed in confusion. "Who is this?" he asked, his voice careful but not unkind. Nita beamed, hugging his neck tightly. "Papa, this is the lady I told you about. She was crying at the station, and I knew she was the one. She came because you need her." The man's eyes widened slightly as he looked at Ayanna again. His face showed surprise, then caution, and finally something else, something softer, though he tried to hide it. He set his daughter down gently and stepped forward. I am sorry," he said slowly, his voice carrying both weariness and sincerity. "I don't know why my child has brought you here, but you are welcome under this roof. Please come inside." Ayanna hesitated at the threshold, her heart pounding. She had not planned any of this. She was supposed to be on a different path, one built on promises that had turned to dust. Yet here she was, standing before a man and his daughter who seemed to believe that fate itself had led her to them. She took a deep breath and stepped forward. The little girl clapped her hands happily, and the man, though still guarded, moved aside to let her in. As the door closed behind her, Ayanna felt as though another door, one unseen, was slowly opening. She did not yet understand what lay ahead, but for the first time that day, her tears had stopped. Instead, she felt a quiet stirring inside her heart, a question waiting to be answered. Perhaps the girl was right. Perhaps her journey was not ending, but just beginning. The cabin smelled faintly of smoke and bread when Ayanna stepped inside. The walls were plain wood, rough and worn, yet every corner of the house spoke of survival and effort. A handmade quilt lay folded on a bench. A stack of firewood was neatly arranged near the stove. On the table there were 2 bowls and 1 small cup waiting for supper. The place was simple, but it felt alive. It was the kind of home built not with riches, but with hands that worked and hearts that tried to keep hope alive. Nita rushed ahead, placing her doll carefully on the table, as though introducing her new friend to the little house. "Papa, can she stay for supper?" she asked eagerly, tugging at his sleeve. The man glanced at Ayanna again, his eyes deep and cautious but polite. "If the lady wishes," he answered. His voice was soft, though it carried the rough edge of someone used to speaking little and working much. Ayanna stood quietly, unsure. She had walked into this house only because of a child's words. Yet something about the warmth of the fire and the way Nita clung to her made it hard to step back out. "I do not want to trouble you," she whispered. The man shook his head. "There is no trouble. You must be tired from the road." He gestured toward the bench. "Please sit." She lowered herself onto the bench, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She could feel her heart still heavy from the station. Yet here she was being offered a place at the table of strangers. Nita busied herself with setting out spoons, humming a small tune, her joy filling the quiet room. The man stirred the pot on the stove and filled the bowls with stew. It was thin, made from beans, a few bits of meat, and wild herbs, but the smell was comforting. He placed a bowl in front of Ayanna with a respectful nod. "It is not much," he said, "but it is what we have." She picked up the spoon, her fingers trembling slightly. The taste was simple, earthy, but after the long day it felt like kindness itself. She ate slowly, her eyes occasionally lifting to see the man's weary face. His shoulders were strong but hunched, as if life had pressed too heavily on them. His hands were calloused, scarred from labor. And when he coughed into his sleeve, she noticed the effort it took him to hide his weakness from Nita. "You work this land alone?" she asked softly. The man nodded. "Since my wife passed, I do what I can. Some days are harder than others." He paused, his gaze dropping to the bowl. "But my daughter is strong. She keeps me going." Nita grinned, as if proud of her father's words, and leaned against his arm. "Papa tells the best stories," she added. "He says Mama listens from the stars." Ayanna's chest tightened. She could feel the weight of their losses, yet also the bond that tied them together. The little girl clung to hope, and the father clung to strength, both holding on for each other. When supper was finished, Nita carried the bowls to the wash basin. The man turned to Ayanna, his voice hesitant but genuine. "I don't know why my daughter brought you here," he said. "She believes strongly in her prayers, but I don't expect a stranger to carry our burdens. You must have your own journey." Ayanna lowered her eyes. She thought of the train, of the man who had promised her a new life and then disappeared without a word. She thought of the shame she had felt standing alone on the platform. Her journey, the one she had trusted, had already broken. She lifted her gaze again and said quietly, "Sometimes the road we plan is not the road we walk." The man studied her for a moment, then gave a small nod, as if her words were truer than she realized. "My name is Thomas," he finally said. "And you are?" "Ayanna," she answered. Her voice wavered, but speaking her name out loud reminded her of who she still was. Someone who had endured, someone who could still choose where to go next. That night, she thought she would leave after supper. She told herself she should not stay where she did not belong. Yet when Nita climbed into her bed of quilts and whispered, "Don't go yet," Ayanna found her heart unable to refuse. She lay awake on a blanket spread near the fire, listening to the soft breathing of the child and the faint coughs of Thomas in the next room. The sound of the fire crackling seemed to hold her there, as though the little cabin itself was asking her to rest. Morning light filtered through the cracks in the shutters. Ayanna rose quietly, her hands brushing against her dress, and stepped outside. The land stretched wide before her, fields in need of care, fences leaning, and animals waiting to be fed. She saw Thomas already at work despite his cough, carrying water from the well with effort. His steps were slow, his breath heavy, but his determination pushed him forward. Without thinking, Ayanna walked to him. "Let me help," she said. She reached for the bucket, her strong hand steady, and carried it with ease. Thomas looked at her with surprise, then a reluctant smile touched his tired face. "You don't need to," he said. "I know," she replied simply. "But I want to." From that moment, the rhythm of the homestead began to change. Ayanna helped mend the fence, her fingers skilled with knots and ties. She gathered eggs from the chickens, her gentle touch calming the birds. She swept the floor, cooked meals, and even told Nita stories by the fire when Thomas's coughing grew too strong. Day by day, she found herself woven into their lives. At first, she thought she was only staying until she decided where to go next. But every time she considered leaving, Nita's laughter pulled her back. Every time Thomas looked at her with quiet gratitude, she felt something stir inside her chest. In the evenings, they spoke more. Thomas told her about the years he had spent carving a life from the land, about the joy of marrying his wife and the pain of losing her too soon. Ayanna shared small pieces of her own story, though she left out the wound of being abandoned at the station. Some pains were still too fresh to put into words. But even in silence, something passed between them, an understanding of loss, and a quiet respect for the strength it took to keep living after sorrow. One night, as Nita slept by the fire, Thomas sat across from Ayanna and said, "When I first saw you standing by the fence, I thought you were a vision. My child's imagination has brought strangers here before, but this time, she was right. You carry a sadness, but also a strength, and somehow you have brought light into this house again." Ayanna lowered her gaze, her cheeks warm. She had not felt like light in a long time, but the word stayed with her. wrapping around her like a cloak against the cold. The days stretched on. Work filled their hands, conversations filled the evenings, and slowly the house began to feel less lonely. Ayanna no longer thought of the station every hour. She no longer felt the sting of abandonment as sharply. Instead, she began to wonder if the road she had been forced onto was leading her toward something she had never expected, a family she had not sought, but perhaps was meant to find. And deep inside, she knew that her story with Thomas and Nita was only just beginning. The days turned into weeks, and what began as a stranger's kindness soon grew into something much more. The cabin, once quiet and heavy with silence, began to carry the soft rhythm of life again. Ayanna moved about the home as though she had always belonged there. She swept the floors each morning, prepared meals with careful hands, and even patched the torn shirts that Thomas wore for work. Nita followed her everywhere, smiling brightly, holding her hand as if she feared letting go. It was as though the little girl had decided that Ayanna was the missing piece their family had been waiting for. At first, Thomas resisted the thought of letting someone new into his life. He had grown used to carrying his burdens alone. His pride had made him believe he had to be strong without help, even when his body betrayed him. Yet as he watched Ayanna mend fences, carry buckets of water, and soothe Nita to sleep with soft songs, he realized that her presence did not weaken him. It strengthened him. She filled the spaces that grief had hollowed out, not with grand gestures but with small acts of care. One evening after a long day of work, they sat outside beneath the fading light of the sun. The field stretched wide and golden, and the sky burned with shades of orange and pink. Thomas leaned back against the wooden rail, his chest still aching from the cough that refused to leave him. Ayanna sat nearby, her hands busy weaving a small bracelet of grass for Nita, who laughed and clapped her hands in delight. "You do more than you should," Thomas said after a moment of silence, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Ayanna looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" He cleared his throat, his voice rough but sincere. "This is not your burden. You owe us nothing, yet you work as though this were your home." Ayanna lowered her gaze to the bracelet in her hands. She thought of the station again, the heartbreak that had almost broken her spirit. "Sometimes the heart chooses a place before the mind does," she whispered. Thomas turned to her, his eyes searching her face. He wanted to ask her about her past, to know what pain she carried in her heart, but he stopped himself. He sensed that she was not ready to share that wound, and he respected her silence. That night, as the stars filled the sky, Nita crawled onto Ayanna's lap and rested her head against her chest. "Mama used to sing to me before I slept," she murmured. "Will you sing too?" Ayanna hesitated. Her voice trembled as she began, but soon the melody flowed softly, like the wind through the trees. The song was one her mother had taught her long ago, a lullaby spoken in gentle Apache words that carried love and strength. Nita's eyes grew heavy, and within moments she was asleep, her face calm and peaceful. Thomas watched from the doorway. His chest tightened, not from illness, but from something he could not name. Seeing Ayanna hold his daughter, hearing the song that seemed to wrap the house in warmth, he realized how long it had been since their home had felt whole. For the first time in years, he did not feel entirely alone. The next morning brought new challenges. A storm swept across the plains, heavy rains flooding the small creek near their land. Fences broke under the pressure of rushing water, and the animals panicked in the downpour. Thomas tried to work despite his coughing, but his body failed him and he stumbled, clutching his chest. Ayanna rushed to his side, steadying him with strong hands. "You cannot do this alone," she said firmly. Her voice carried no room for argument. Together they rounded up the animals, repaired what fences they could, and guided the frightened horse back into the stable. Her dress clung to her in the rain, her hair heavy with water, but she did not stop until the work was done. When they finally stepped back into the cabin, soaked and exhausted, Thomas looked at her with something new in his eyes, gratitude mixed with admiration. "I don't know why you stayed," he said quietly, "but I am glad you did." Ayanna met his gaze, her own eyes soft. "Perhaps I stayed because I needed a place as much as you needed help." In the days that followed, the bond between them grew deeper. Ayanna found herself laughing more often, especially at Nita's playful games. She began teaching the little girl simple crafts her own mother had once taught her: how to weave, how to grind herbs into medicine, how to listen to the sounds of nature around them. Nita adored her, often calling her Mama by mistake. Each time it happened, Thomas would look at Ayanna with an unreadable expression, torn between pain for the wife he had lost and hope for what might be forming before him. One evening, Thomas sat by the fire, his cough heavy but his voice steady. "I thought I had lost everything when my wife passed," he admitted. "But seeing my daughter laugh again, seeing her sleep peacefully, I realized that life still gives us gifts even when we don't expect them." He looked at Ayanna, his gaze lingering. "You are one of those gifts." Ayanna's breath caught. She had not come here seeking love, nor family, nor even belonging. She had come here broken, left behind, believing she had no future. Yet with every passing day, she found herself healing in ways she had never imagined. But with healing came fear. At night, when the fire dimmed and the house grew quiet, she wondered if this peace could last. Would she once again be abandoned, left to face sorrow alone, or was this the place where her heart was finally meant to rest? One night, as she tucked Nita into bed, the little girl held her hand tightly. "Don't leave us," she whispered. "I prayed for you. If you go, my prayer will break." Ayanna kissed her forehead softly, her heart aching. "I am here, little one," she said, her voice steady, though her heart trembled. "I will not leave." In that moment, she realized the truth. She was no longer just a visitor, no longer a stranger who had stumbled into their lives. She was part of their story now, bound by love stronger than any promise that had ever been broken. And for the first time in a long time, she believed that perhaps her story had not ended at the train station. It had only just begun, in this small cabin, with a man and his daughter who had taught her that broken hearts could be mended and that new beginnings often rose from the ruins of old dreams. The season slowly shifted, and the air carried a gentler warmth as the days grew longer. The fields around the cabin began to show signs of new life, tiny green shoots pushing through the soil. With every sunrise, the small family inside the wooden house felt a little stronger. Ayanna no longer thought of herself as a guest. She moved through the home naturally, tending to chores, preparing meals, and sharing laughter with Nita as though she had always been there. Yet in the quiet of her heart, she knew a question waited, unspoken. Would this place truly be her home? Or was it only a pause before another journey? She had been abandoned once. The memory of standing alone on the train platform still visited her dreams. But when she awoke to Nita's arms around her or Thomas's soft, "Good morning," the pain of the past began to fade like mist in sunlight. One evening, after a long day of mending fences and grinding corn, the three of them sat outside on the porch. The sky was painted with shades of purple and gold, the stars beginning to peek out. Nita sat between them, humming a tune as she braided strands of grass into a tiny crown. She placed it on Ayanna's head and giggled. "Now you look like a queen," she said proudly. Thomas's gaze lingered on Ayanna longer than usual. His face, weathered by years of hard work and sorrow, softened in the fading light. When Nita ran inside to fetch her doll, leaving them alone for a moment, he cleared his throat and spoke. "I never thought I would say this," he began slowly, his voice low and steady. "When my wife passed, I believed that part of my life was over. I accepted loneliness as my only companion. But since you came," he paused, searching for words, "you have brought back laughter, peace, and hope. My daughter sees you as her mother, and truth be told, my heart has begun to see you as more than just a kind guest." Ayanna's breath caught. She looked at him, her heart racing. She had not expected such honesty. For weeks she had felt the same quiet bond growing, but she had been afraid to name it. "Thomas," she whispered, "I came here broken. I thought I had lost everything. But here with you and Nita, I have found something I never thought I would again. A home, a family." He reached out, his rough hand trembling slightly as it touched hers. "Then stay. Not as a visitor. Not as a helper. Stay as part of us. Be my partner, my wife, and Nita's mother." Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they were not born of sorrow. They were tears of healing, of joy, of relief. She nodded, her voice barely steady. "Yes, I will stay." When Nita returned, she saw them holding hands and beamed with joy. "Does this mean you're my mama now?" she asked with innocent excitement. Ayanna pulled her close, kissing her forehead gently. "Yes, little one, if you will have me." Nita's arms wrapped tightly around her, her smile brighter than the stars above. "I prayed and God answered," she said, her voice filled with triumph. In the days that followed, the small cabin buzzed with quiet celebration. Thomas, though still weary from his illness, found new strength in preparing for a humble wedding. Ayana sewed a simple veil from cloth she had saved, while Nita gathered wildflowers from the fields to weave into decorations. Neighbors, once distant and doubtful, began to notice the change in the homestead. They saw the light in Thomas's eyes, the joy in Nita's laughter, and the grace with which Ayana carried herself. Slowly, respect replaced the whispers that had once followed her. The wedding day arrived with clear skies and gentle breezes. The ceremony was not grand. There were no fine clothes, no church bells, no large crowd. It was held in the open field beside the cabin, with only a few neighbors and friends as witnesses. But what it lacked in grandeur, it carried in sincerity. Thomas stood tall despite his weakness, his eyes fixed on Ayana as if she were the only person in the world. Ayana wore the dress she had once thought would lead to sorrow. Now it carried new meaning, stitched not with broken promises but with hope restored. Nita stood proudly between them, holding both their hands as though binding them together with her small but determined heart. The vows were simple. Thomas promised to honor and cherish Ayana, to walk beside her no matter how hard the days became. Ayana promised to stand by his side, to care for him and Nita, and to never let the weight of sorrow break their bond. When the words were spoken and their hands joined, it felt as though the earth itself bore witness to their union. When the ceremony ended, there was no music, only the laughter of Nita running through the fields with her flower crown tilted on her head. Ayana and Thomas watched her, their fingers still interlaced, and knew they had found something rare and precious. As the sun dipped low, Thomas leaned close and whispered, "You were left in tears at the station, but here you are, standing with us. That pain led you here. Maybe some broken roads are meant to guide us to the right place." Ayana rested her head against his shoulder, her heart at peace. She no longer carried the shame of abandonment. Instead, she carried the strength of surviving it and the joy of finding love where she least expected. That night, as the stars filled the sky above the little cabin, Ayana sat by the fire with Thomas and Nita curled against her. She realized her story was no longer one of sorrow, but of renewal. She had been left behind once, but now she was chosen by a man who truly loved her, and by a child who had prayed her into their lives, and so, the woman who had once wept alone on a platform began a new life, not defined by what she had lost, but by what she had gained. A family, a home, and a future filled with hope.